And I do want to remind you, it's obvious at some level, but it is really worth pointing out that the year you just went through and the year you're going into is way bigger than just the tech space, right? Way bigger than just your economy here in Europe, global economy. We're really going through, I think in the long term, if we look back in 10, 20 years, we're going to be seeing this as one of the more fundamental restructurings the world has gone through. There's a really, really fundamental shift going on here. There's a few times this happens when we face as a kind of world an unprecedented series of challenges, which we are up against now, and also when you see deep structural changes in the fabric of the economy and society. We're in one of those moments now. We're watching a kind of a tectonic technology shifts, not just, by the way, in information technology, but we're watching it in biotech now. We're watching it in energy technologies. There's some really fundamental restructurings going on in technology. We're watching this re-knitting of the global economy and really the entire global system. It's not just globalization. We're watching incredible global integration that, looking back 50 years, will be seen as the critical thing that happened around the early part of the 21st century. And ultimately, we're watching this whole series of challenges which are almost mind-boggling in their complexity, particularly global climate change. But there's all kinds of them now that are hitting us in the 21st century in a way that we've never really had to deal with before. So the larger sense of what your company's doing is don't lose track of this really meta change that's happening all around you at the same time. So we're looking at a kind of a transition in the course of the next 10, 20 years here that truly is moving from a kind of much more globalized, integrated kind of world. We're definitely in the beginning parts, despite the kind of frustration around Copenhagen. We saw some big moves there. We're really watching fundamental shifts in our energy technologies, which is going to have a lot of implications for technology companies in the IT space. So much of that has to be managed by that. We're watching a sustainable shift, which is going to have a lot of pressure on corporations to kind of, in fact, we're watching it here in this Society's palace here. Beautiful kind of sensibility towards sustainability that's only going to get more and more ratcheted up in the next 10, 20 years as this gets more difficult. And ultimately, we're watching a kind of a shift across the centuries. This is finally the kind of big new invention of 21st century systems. Now, if you get more concrete about that big picture kind of what's happening, you essentially have a series of smaller paradigm shifts. And one paradigm shift, which is absolutely comes through loud and clear, is a shift towards greater and greater engagement of more and more people to draw them into these processes. And it happens in several ways. You're watching it very clearly, and I'm going to touch just briefly on it. It has happened in media. All the 20th century medias were broadcast, essentially centralized broadcast systems from newspapers and broadcast television, books, magazines, all of them. They are decimated, and they are being now superseded by an engaged media, a media that actually connects with people that people can get involved with. Crystal clear in that thing about that trend being very, very clear. What I also was involved with the last 4 years is essentially the old way of doing politics, very centralized top-down way of doing politics, was demolished by essentially a technologically enhanced, decentralized way that engaged way more people in the process of politics. And that was the Obama campaign, of which I was involved with. And I'm going to give you a little bit of the facts on that just to kind of remind you how this works at other fields. But the final thing I'm going to end up with is how this is now hitting large-scale problem solving, which has applications in a societal way, but also how companies are going to essentially envision their strategies, engage their strategies, and really get everyone in the organization engaged in figuring out strategy and where to go. The ultimate way you kind of think about this, it's essentially a struggle between two paradigms, a centralized top-down and a kind of more bottom-up engaged one. And that's still, the jury is out at how that actually is playing out. But that's one way to kind of think of the ultimate shift.